Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I am doing a deck review of the Saltwater Reading Cards by Laura Bowen. Now this is a review I've been meaning to do for ages, but as with the Dreamtime Reading Cards, also by Laura Bowen, which is my favourite Oracle deck, far and away, I don't know, these decks just mean a lot to me, and so I'm always in that space of really wanting to do these decks justice, and so I take a while to get around to doing the review. But I have been requested for this review, especially more recently, quite a number of times, so I'm here today finally with the review. Now before we get into the review, I did just want to say that Laura actually sent me this deck about 18 months ago now. She sent me this deck as a gift because I talk about her Dreamtime Reading Cards all the time, and I think she just enjoyed having someone so enthusiastic about her work. So she did send this to me as a gift, as I said, over a year ago, but there was never any expectation for a review or anything like that. It was just a gift, a bit of a thank you. But I am here to do a review, and so I thought I should let you know, get that out of the way. So let's dive in. As with all Rockpool decks, they come in these really awesome boxes that are really quite sturdy, and I love the size of them because they sit really nicely on a shelf, like they're not too thick. The side has a magnetic flap, which is awesome, and then they open up like this. Now when you first get them, the book is on top and the deck is kind of housed in one of those little cardboard things, so the deck kind of like sits in the middle better, but that's kind of annoying, and I don't know, I think me along with very many other people just throw that out, and so this is how I keep my deck in here now. The book, as with Rockpool decks, is like a good proper little book. How long is it? It's 95 pages, so it's not too thick, but I mean for a 36 card deck, I think this is, you know, you get plenty of info in here. And what I will say is that Laura is not only an artist, I think she's a beautiful wordsmith as well. I mean, I think she definitely is an artist first and foremost, but this guidebook is written by her, and it's beautiful and soulful and really personal and touching. The book is full color, and the pages are kind of that nice, thick, glossy, almost sort of, like not super glossy, but nice paper. And we get heaps of info, which is awesome. We get a bit of an introduction to saltwater in general and these cards specifically, and then we get a little bit about how to use the cards, which is awesome. A couple of spreads and working with saltwater. And I'll talk a little bit about saltwater specifically when we're looking at this deck. And then we go into the meanings of the cards, and we get a full page, like this is a full-size colored reproduction and one page of text from Laura. What I really like about her descriptions is it kind of starts with just talking about whatever is in the card. So for this card, it's blue bottles. So she'll describe blue bottles and, you know, what they do in the wild, maybe what they eat, like it depends on what's in the card. But she gives you a little bit of an idea of what this creature or whatever it is that's depicted in the card, what they're like in their natural habitat, which I think is really cool. And then she talks about the keyword, and then it's kind of more of a message of what this means for you and what you can do. So I really like, it's not a huge amount of information, but it's plenty, and it's all really, really thoughtful and actually useful and interesting, and it's beautifully written too. And then when we get to the end of the book, we just have a little bit about Laura. There we go, a little bit about Laura, about the artwork, and this artwork is all done using feathers. So it is dot artwork, which is very famous. I think it's one of the most famous indigenous forms of artwork throughout the world. This dot artwork, it's beautiful, and Laura uses feathers, the tips of feathers, for all of the dots that she creates, which is really awesome. So this is the Smith-Waite Centennial, pretty traditional sort of sized tarot deck. And that is the Saltwater Reading Cards. So they're very large. They really are quite large. And Rockpool's, I quite like Rockpool's cardstock. It's bendy, but it is quite thick. Not too thick, but it's not like flimsy. And it is quite glossy, as you can see, which I don't mind for Oracle decks, especially decks like this where the color just totally pops. I think I really quite like the cardstock and everything for this. And what I do like is it's not like that sticky, glossy cardstock. It's not sticky at all. It's quite slidey. So you don't, it's not slippery, but it's not sticky. Like, it's kind of like a nice, as far as glossy cardstock goes, I'm pretty satisfied with this one. Now let's have a bit of a look. These aren't in order because obviously this is a deck that I use. And this definitely feels like more of a spring, high summer sort of deck to me. Laura actually initially sent it to me just before winter last year, and I didn't really touch it for quite a while. But then as soon as summer hit, I was all about it. And it is just so beautiful. The colors are so bright and beautiful. It's just amazing. And what I love is that you get the number of the cards, so it's really easy to look up in the guidebook, although I do think they're in alphabetical order too. But anyway, you get the number of the card, the name of the creature, or whatever's depicted in the card, and then a keyword, which I love because it means that if you don't really know these creatures very well, you have a bit to go on. Which I always like with oracle decks, especially ones that are themed, like whether they're animals or plants. Like, I will often use the guidebook, but for say one day that I don't want to, I just think having that little keyword, something simple, really kind of helps you start to work with the image more intuitively, rather than kind of going, oh, what's a seagull? I don't know what seagulls are, other than they steal your chips. So I love the keywords, and what I will say about the keywords that Laura has chosen, I love them, especially because they're not the typical sort of keywords that you see on every other oracle deck, and they're also not keywords that she would have just googled what does pelican mean. You know, they're not just traditional everyday correspondences. They're really specific, and you can tell that these keywords come from Laura really knowing the land on which she lives, the water that she experiences near where she lives, and understanding kind of what these animals mean to her. And that's why I love the early part of the description in the book, where she talks about what this creature is, what it does, what it eats, because we really see where these keywords come from. So they're not just random, meaningless. I sometimes find with some decks it's almost like, where did you get that from? I don't understand. And then they just give a generic meaning about this, not about this, if that makes sense, in some guidebooks. Some guidebooks don't really draw the two together, the art and the keyword and the message. Those things don't always come together. In Laura's work, it absolutely does. And that's why it's so amazing working with the deck and the book, although you can work with just the deck or just the book even. They're really solid individual pieces in terms of the deck with the artwork and the book in terms of Laura's writing, but together they come together really beautifully. This is one of my favorite cards. Isn't it just gorgeous? Like those colors. Now I also wanted to talk a little bit, another one. It's just the most incredibly beautiful, bright, I don't know, it just excites my eyes. It's just incredible. But I did want to talk a little bit about salt water specifically, because I think so often when we think of water, just water, and we're talking about like the element of water in the community, whether it's to do with tarot or, you know, the elemental associations more in witchcraft, paganism, Wicca. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I always think of more, you know, the cups in tarot, the star card, you know, it's like that healing, gentle, beautiful, soothing energy. This deck isn't that water, it's salt water, and there's a big difference. And to me, I guess I've managed to kind of really solidify the difference in my head through two key different examples. The first is an experience, a personal experience. Especially when I was younger, I have really sensitive skin, so I was allergic to mosquitoes and stuff growing up. And basically I used to just have a lot of infected sores, especially on my legs. It was gross and it was crappy. And I was always at the doctor's, and then one doctor said to Mum, you know, stop putting her in baths with fancy lotions. Take her to the beach, don't put any sunscreen on or anything, get those legs out in the sun and in the salt water. That was my diagnosis to deal with my legs. And it worked. It was painful, like when I'd walk into the ocean it would sting, but it was so cleansing, and with that cleansing came a sense of relief. So that is what saltwater is to me. It's not always pleasant and soothing and soft, but it is healing in its own way, in a really cleansing, powerful way. And the other thing I kind of think about with this deck is, as I said, it's not the star card in tarot. I think it's temperance. It's transformative. And it's a beautiful kind of bringing together of the salt, which is quite harsh and drying, and the water. It's bringing those two things together to create something entirely new, which is salt water, and the experience of that both in the ocean but also in saltwater lakes and creeks and rivers. And the type of healing that comes from salt water is very different. It doesn't always feel easy and gentle and soft and nice. It can feel tricky, it can feel intense, it can sting, but it's also really, really powerful. The other thing I like about this deck is it's really quite playful. It doesn't feel childlike at all, but it feels kind of like the image, I don't know, that I think a lot of us have in our heads of that really kind of the fool as an old man, that really jovial, light spirit that comes with really, really high wisdom. That's what this deck feels for me. It doesn't take itself too seriously at all, and it doesn't take me too seriously. It's quite playful, it's fun, it's light, but it also knows how to get into those cracks and into those bits of you that really do need clearing. And it's just such a beautiful deck. I mean, look at this. Look at this artwork. I mean, how can you turn just a regular old sea sponge into something this beautiful and then something so meaningful? It's also been a very synchronistic deck for me, and as you can see, it's not all creatures, it's also just elemental experiences, weather patterns, things like that come up. A lot of it is creatures and animals and plankton and whatever else, but not all of it is. Some more generically the reef, as we have the great, although sadly dying, Great Barrier Reef in Queensland and even into New South Wales. But you know, it's not a single entity. It is a living, breathing organism, but it's an organism made of many. And we also don't just have fluffy fun cards. Laura has experienced some of the darker emotions that life has to offer us, which she kind of talks about more with the Dreamtime Reading Cards. That deck was kind of birthed during a difficult experience in her life. And so her decks aren't fluffy at all. And even with the lighter cards in the book, you'll be reading through and it's not all light fun. Some of the cards are, but a lot of them, that's not what this deck is about. It's not just a fluffy affirmation to pick you up. I mean, it can be if that's what you need and that's what you want, but ultimately this deck and her decks in general, the Dreamtime Reading Cards included, you get what you put in, sort of thing. Like there's so much in these cards and Laura's writing that you can spend all day or week or month with one card and really work through some stuff that you have going on. There's so much wisdom and beauty to be found in Laura's work and in these cards. And I mean, the Dreamtime Reading Cards will always be my #1 love, but this deck, this has found its way into my heart as well. I love this. Laura actually sent me a print of this, and it's just one of the most beautiful images. And also I love that the moon phases are as we see them down here in Australia. Up north, this is the waxing and this is the waning moon. For us down here, it's the opposite. And I know it's so simple, and obviously, like, I mean, even down here, we often think of the moon phases as being as they are in the Northern Hemisphere because we see that imagery so often, you know? So when I saw this, it just made me smile. Like, Laura isn't tied up in the symbolism and imagery of specifically the Northern Hemisphere. She is portraying and expressing the emotional experience and the visual experience of what it's like to live where she does. And although that experience can then be translated to a universal message, it's grounded and rooted in her personal experience, and that's what makes these cards so touching and powerful and beautiful, I think. They're just so lovely. And it looks like we've done a whole walkthrough. This is another one of my favorite. This is actually the backing, just kind of without all the color. What I've also found personally is that the Dreamtime reading cards I will use all year round, but especially in winter, but I will use it all the time. And I also prefer using it at night time, but again, I'll use it anytime. Whereas with this deck, I find I don't use it at all in winter, really, unless it might just be for one draw because I miss it or something. But really, this deck comes out in October-ish, even sometimes a bit later, depending on, I don't know, it's not even like the heat or something. There's a smell in the air, and we got that a couple of weeks ago, just that first smell. I was like, it smells like summer, and Blair's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know, but it's time to get this deck out. So for me, this is much more of a summertime sort of deck, and I also do prefer working with it during the day. Like, I don't really work with it at nighttime at all. So that's just my experience, and I think that's more just like an interesting thing for me to note and notice. It's very easy to shuffle. I can just hold it this way, but barely. Like, it's straining my hand as much as it can reach. But because it's not like a very thick deck, and the cards aren't sticky, it's quite easy to shuffle them lengthways. And that's generally how I shuffle, although it is still easy enough to riffle shuffle, but again, I tend to do it more from the corners or from the sides rather than the regular way, because it's just borderline too big for my hands. I mean, I can do it, and sometimes I do. And even though, as I've said, the Dreamtime reading cards, I've had them for so long and I use them so regularly throughout the seasons, day or night. I have developed a very deep personal relationship with them, and if I could only ever have one oracle deck, I wouldn't even have to think about it. It would be the Dreamtime reading cards. But I found myself like a couple of weeks ago when I smelt that summer air, I was so looking forward to getting this deck out again. This is the second summer I will have spent with this deck. And I mean, I've had it for 18 months, but it still feels really fresh and new, our relationship. And as I say that out loud with those words that I've chosen, I realize that's less about me not knowing it well enough yet, because already it's been really impactful and synchronistic for me. It's less about me not knowing it yet, and that freshness, that excitement, that actually being the core, a really core part of my experience of this deck now and potentially very far into the future. It is that kind of really light freshness of the ocean water for me. But anyway, enough of me badgering on. Let's shuffle the deck and we will draw a card, and I will read to you what Laura has provided in the book, just so you can get an idea. I always think this is helpful, and I like to see this in reviews, just because I don't need to read the whole book to decide whether the deck is going to be for me, but I do like to get an idea of what is provided in the book and the voice of the author. And as I said, I really appreciate Laura's voice. Giant clam, harmony. Isn't that pretty? A clam. So cool. Okay, let's set this up for you. Ooh, my poor little bonsai friend. Let's set this up for you, and I will read what Laura has in her book. So we'll look up number 11. The giant clam is the largest living mollusk. They can live for a very long time, over 100 years, and can grow to over 1 meter in diameter. The giant clam survives by feeding on the nutrients produced by the algae that live in its tissues. These algae that live inside the clam need the clam shell to be open to breathe, so the clam obliges by keeping its shell open. In turn, the clam is rewarded with the most brilliant colours of blues, greens, and even purples, created by the sun-baking algae illuminating it from its centre. Giant clam speaks of harmony and the mutual benefits that we can discover when harmony is achieved. Harmony is often about balance, coming to an agreement, which sees both sides working together to achieve some kind of peaceful situation. The giant clam asks you to be open to helping others. There is often a reward for us when we show generosity to another. If there has been discord or conflict, then the clam challenges you to make things right and to look for peaceful solutions to your current situation. This does not mean you must settle for a situation that is damaging or not viable for you, as these will only cause hurt and resentment in the long run. Instead, the clam asks you to look at how you can come to some kind of mutual agreement that is beneficial and harmonious for all involved. That may even be to agree to disagree, but it is important that it be done with respect, integrity, and honesty. I kind of feel like in many ways that is how we need to approach this deck, with respect, integrity, and honesty. That's kind of what it expects from us in many ways, as does the ocean. So I really liked that, and I hope this has given you a little bit of an idea of what it's like to work with Laura's beautiful, beautiful deck. As with the Dreamtime Reading Cards, I couldn't recommend this deck more highly. Both of her decks, I mean, I think I've given them all the praise in the world, and I could still keep going, couldn't I? The Dreamtime Reading Cards are incredible. They are old and soulful. And the Saltwater Reading Cards are just such a beautiful, beautiful complement to that. As with most oracle cards, I tend to just either draw one card for maybe a daily card or a weekly card, or I'll draw three. I don't tend to go more than that with oracle decks, and I really quite like using the guidebooks. That's just how I like to read oracle decks in general, and so this sticks pretty well to that for me. I also do like journaling with these cards, and also just placing them as artwork on my altar or having them around, because I just think they're so beautiful and they have such a loving, powerful energy to them that having them around, I think, you know, you get to tap into that energy on the go. So I do hope you found this review helpful. Hope it's answered some questions and encouraged those of you who have been considering this deck to perhaps, you know, take the plunge. Oh, no pun intended. This deck is just incredible. Laura Bowen's incredible. Laura's actually kind of starting to get a bit more active on YouTube, so I will leave a link to her YouTube channel below, and you can also find her on Instagram. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave those below. I always do my best to get back to you guys, especially if you have specific questions, especially about decks. You know, with my reviews, I try to make them as helpful as possible, but if I've missed something, or if, you know, this has just brought up another question, feel free to leave that below and I will do my best to answer you. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. I'm putting up 2 videos every week at the moment, and I'd love to see you around again. And until next time, guys, so much love. Bye.